Caitlin Clark let it be known live on camera, I'm 100% healthy.
Caitlin Clark just dropped some huge news that has the entire WNBA holding its breath. After a season where she was clearly battling through injuries that nobody really wanted to talk about, she's now saying she's back to think about it. The league's biggest star, their cash cow, their whole ratings machine, is healthy again. And the timing of this announcement, absolutely perfect for maximum chaos, if you ask me. How much of Clark's struggles this past season do you think were actually from injuries versus just, the insane pressure?
I know it's been a tough year in terms of injury for you. Does that mean you've played a little bit more golf this year?
Unfortunately, it means I've played less, just because I haven't been able to get out there with some of the injuries that I was dealing with, but now feeling back to 100%. So I've been trying to take advantage of the fall weather in Indianapolis before, it gets too cold, and obviously being down here in Florida, the weather makes it pretty easy to play some golf, but getting in as much as I can. Obviously, I stay pretty busy, so I don't get to play as much as I would.
Look, let's just cut through all the nonsense and talk about what everyone in the WNBA has been tiptoeing around for months. Caitlin Clark was hurt, like actually hurt. We're not talking about minor discomfort or just dealing with the grind. She was legitimately injured and playing through it. Why? Because the Indiana Fever desperately needed her on the court, and she's just too competitive to sit out. And now, finally, at a random golf program, of all places, she just casually mentions she's feeling back to, as if that's not a massive admission that basically confirms what anyone with functioning eyes could already see.
Can't wait. The GOAT is 100% ready.
Now, think back to the very beginning of the season. Remember that preseason game against Iowa? Clark just looked off. It wasn't like she was shaking off a little rust. She was actually moving at half speed, like something was clearly wrong. Then, the Fever turned around and had her play another preseason game in Atlanta. And honestly, everyone with a brain was asking, why? Why would you risk your franchise player, your entire business model, in a meaningless exhibition game? The answer is probably because the organization was just desperate to sell tickets and generate buzz. So they threw caution to the wind. Real smart, long-term planning there, Indiana.
Next on the tee, Caitlin Clark.
Yards isn't fair. You should be able to move up.
Then came the groin injuries, plural. And remember that ankle situation the Fever tried to keep completely under wraps like it was classified information? The organization's handling of Clark's health was an absolute disaster, which, let's be honest, is probably why they fired their entire medical staff and started fresh. When your star player spends an entire season visibly compromised, and you're still trotting her out there for 40 minutes a night, maybe, just maybe, your sports medicine department needs a total overhaul.
We don't need to speculate. We're hearing it from her mouth herself. This is something that people all off-season people, oh man, well, Caitlin's not saying what's going on with her injuries. And hey, we wanted to know directly from the horse's mouth. Why? Because we know we can't trust Stephanie White. We know for a fact, we can't trust Amber Cox, Kelly Crosskoff, and the Indiana Fever organization.
But here's the thing that should truly terrify every other team in the WNBA. Caitlin Clark just told everyone she's healthy now. The player who basically dragged the Fever to relevance while playing on one leg is about to show up next season at full strength. That's not just good news for Indiana. That's an existential threat to every single team that thought they had her figured out. Because spoiler alert, they didn't. They just played against a hobbled version of her and barely survived. Seeing Clark at that golf event was super revealing, and it had nothing to do with her swing. She was joking around, loose, genuinely having fun. That's the Caitlin Clark who used to terrorize college basketball. That's the version of her personality that got buried under the weight of constant injuries and the pressure of carrying an entire franchise. Seeing her relaxed and healthy again is a massive positive sign, not just for her production but for her mental state. Playing hurt for an entire season while dealing with unprecedented scrutiny would break most people. The fact that she's coming out of it seemingly intact is truly impressive. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the CBA negotiations. Or, more accurately, the complete disaster that these CBA negotiations are turning into. The WNBA and the players need to figure this out immediately, because the league absolutely cannot afford a lockout. It just can't. The entire business model of women's basketball right now is built on momentum, and momentum dies the second you shut down operations. Fans who finally started paying attention will disappear. Sponsors who finally opened their wallets will close them. And Caitlin Clark's cultural relevance, which is already time-sensitive, will just evaporate. Here's the brutal truth nobody wants to say out loud. Clark's popularity is directly tied to her being on the court and dominating. If she doesn't play basketball for a year or two because of a lockout, that mystique fades. Her cultural moment passes. She becomes a remember-when story instead of a current phenomenon. And the WNBA's growth trajectory, which is entirely dependent on her star power, will stall permanently. This isn't about disrespecting other players. It's about acknowledging reality. Clark is the engine. Remove the engine, and the whole thing stops moving. And get this, the investment money flooding into women's basketball right now isn't coming from traditional sports investors. It's coming from tech bros who see women's sports as the next big speculative bet. They're treating it like crypto or AI. Get in early, watch the valuation explode. Cash out. These are people who can afford to lose $1 billion on a gamble because they're basically playing with house money anyway. The comparison to venture capital is perfect because that's exactly what this is: high risk, high reward betting on an emerging market. And yes, there's Saudi money involved through various investment vehicles, but the bulk of the real cash is coming from Silicon Valley types who looked at WNBA team valuations increasing tenfold in 4 years and thought, we need a piece of this. They can't get into men's sports leagues because the barriers to entry are too expensive. But women's sports, still relatively affordable with massive upside potential. So they're pouring money into leagues like Unrivaled and whatever Project B turns out to be, hoping one of these ventures becomes the next big thing. But here's the problem with all that speculative investment. It's dependent on continuous growth and visibility. The second the WNBA locks out and goes dark for a season, all those investors start asking themselves if they bet on the wrong horse. The narrative shifts from women's basketball is blowing up to women's basketball can't get out of its own way. And investor confidence, once lost, is really hard to rebuild. The WNBA seems to believe they have all the leverage because alternative leagues exist now. That's just delusional. Nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, grows up dreaming of playing in Unrivaled or Project B. Those are supplemental income opportunities, not destinations. Players might sign NIL deals with these leagues while they're in college, but the second WNBA money is on the table, they're taking it. Because the WNBA, for all its flaws, is still the premier women's basketball league in the world. It's where you go to build a legacy. Everything else is just a side hustle. So, let's be completely honest about what a lockout would actually do. Yes, teams like the Fever and the Valkyries would probably still draw okay crowds when play resumed, but most teams would go right back to playing in front of 3,000 people in cavernous NBA arenas. The progress made over the past year, that would evaporate overnight. All those new fans who started paying attention because of Clark and the increased media coverage, gone. They'll just move on to something else because casual fans don't stick around through labor disputes. They just don't. There's no transcendent talent coming through the draft to replace Clark's star power if she's sidelined. This year's draft class is fine, but there's no generational talent. There's no one who's going to capture mainstream attention the way Clark did. The league needs her healthy and playing, not sitting out because billionaires and millionaires can't agree on how to split revenue. What's crazy is Clark's health declaration at a golf tournament is perfectly on brand for how she handles the media. She didn't call a press conference or make a big announcement through official channels. She just casually mentioned it while talking about golf and then moved on. That's super smart because it manages expectations without creating any unnecessary pressure. She's letting everyone know she's good without making it a whole dramatic thing that requires a bunch of follow-up questions and analysis. And on top of that, the Fever's mismanagement of her injuries this past season was basically criminal, playing her heavy minutes when she was clearly compromised, not being transparent about what was actually wrong, putting short-term ticket sales and ratings over her long-term health. That's organizational malpractice. And it's exactly why they had to overhaul their entire medical staff. Because if Clark suffers a serious injury that derails her career because they pushed her too hard, too soon, the franchise is finished, the entire investment thesis collapses. Everything they've built falls apart. What makes this situation even more precarious is the timing. The WNBA is at a total inflection point. They can either capitalize on unprecedented momentum and lock in generational growth, or they can fumble the bag completely with a lockout. There's no middle ground here. And the Players Association seems to be gambling that they have more leverage than they actually do. Because here's the thing. Leveraging labor negotiations is about who can withstand pain longer. And the players, most of whom aren't making life-changing money yet, cannot withstand a lost season the way ownership can. The league's business model is fragile right now. Revenue is up, but it's still operating at a loss overall. The increased investment is speculative, based on projections of future growth. If that growth stalls because of a lockout, the investors who are willing to absorb short-term losses while betting on a long-term payoff will reassess. And once investors start pulling back, the whole house of cards comes down. The WNBA needs to understand that winning a labor dispute doesn't matter if the league collapses in the process. Clark's popularity already took a hit between last season and this one because she wasn't playing at full capacity. Fans could see something was off, even if they couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. The highlights weren't as spectacular. The performances weren't as dominant. That buzz that surrounded her every move started to quiet down just a bit. Now that she's declaring herself healthy, that buzz is about to come roaring back. But only if there's actually a season to play. The Fever's decision-making around Clark's health was just baffling from the start. Everyone could clearly see she wasn't right physically. Her movement was compromised. Her explosiveness was diminished. Yet, they kept running her out there for massive minutes because they couldn't afford not to. The team's entire marketing strategy, their ticket sales, their very relevance, were built on her being available, so they pushed her, even when they shouldn't have. That's a short-sighted approach that could have ended catastrophically if she'd suffered a major injury. Now, with a completely new medical staff, presumably the Fever will handle things differently. They'll actually prioritize long-term health over short-term gains. They'll be transparent about injuries instead of treating them like state secrets. They'll manage workloads intelligently instead of grinding their franchise player into dust. At least, that's the hope, because if they screw this up again, there won't be a third chance. Clark will demand a trade, or her body will break down, and either way, the Fever are done. And yes, the alternative leagues popping up are interesting developments for player compensation, but they are not legitimate threats to the WNBA's primacy. Unrivaled might pay well for a few weeks of summer basketball. Project B might offer decent money for exhibition tournaments. But neither of those replaces what the WNBA offers: a 6-month season with real stakes, a playoff structure, championships that actually mean something, and a platform that reaches mainstream audiences. The alternative leagues are nice supplements, but they're just not replacements. What's really frustrating is how predictable this whole situation is. The WNBA finally has momentum. They finally have mainstream attention. They finally have a superstar that transcends the sport, and they're about to potentially blow it all up over a labor dispute that could be resolved if both sides would actually prioritize the league's long-term health. But instead, we're getting posturing and threats and brinkmanship while the window of opportunity slowly closes. Clark being healthy changes everything going into next season. If there is a next season, she's not going to be satisfied with the individual success she had while compromised. She's going to want team success, championships, legacy-building moments, and a healthy Caitlin Clark on a Fever team that's had a full offseason to build around her properly. That's legitimately scary for the rest of the league. That's a contender, not just a plucky underdog story. The irony is that the very success Clark brought to the league is what's creating leverage in these CBA negotiations. Players are asking for more money because revenue is up, and revenue is up largely because of Clark. So in a weird way, her success is creating the conditions that might lead to a lockout that damages her career and the league's trajectory. That's sports business in a nutshell, everyone trying to maximize their piece of the pie without considering that fighting over it might destroy the whole thing. Caitlin Clark just told the WNBA she's ready to dominate again, but only if there's actually a season to play. The league's biggest star is healthy, the money is flowing, and the momentum is real. But a lockout could torch it all.